All right, we're live. Okay, so nobody yet. All right, hey, Texas Study students. This is Coach Science. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 17 and ranching in Texas. All right, so if you have your notes or if you're following along, all right, please follow along on your notes with me. But just go with me on this little distance learning that we're doing, guys. So I know it's different. I know it's definitely something that we have to adjust. So let's just adjust, go with it, and let's get this through this, guys. So we left off before we left school. We talked about we finished off with the Civil War. We finished off in chapter 16, where life after the Civil War was essentially still a battle because not were they fighting between each other anymore. Now we had to fight against the Native American. The people of America were trying to move westward and continue this idea of manifest destiny, and essentially who was in the way? The Native Americans. So that's where we left off, the war on the frontier in chapter 16. And the thing with that now is what we're seeing is now ranching in Texas. As we look back, guys, ranching in Texas was not something new at that time. It had Spanish origins. In that first section, it talked about before Europeans had explored North America, cattle in Spain were raised for meats, hides, all right? And when the Spanish came to Texas, they brought that cattle with them. That's where they were able to get their, essentially their leathers, things like that, different cuts of meats. So they bring with them that cattle. Now, during the Civil War, guys, cattle was very important. With most men fighting in the Civil War, the ranching work was left undone. Many herds roamed freely in Texas and increased greatly. So remember, before the Civil War, plenty of people to do work, ranching, things like that, agriculture. When the Civil War takes place, boom, people got to go fight. They get drafted, they get picked up. They essentially leave everything that they're doing. Okay, so with that, a lot of places ranches are kind of left, just not having tended with. So remember, right now we get to see a lot of places where you live in a neighborhood, tight areas, right? Back then, open, vast lands. Excuse me. So, if you weren't necessarily taking care of your area, boom, it was just going to explode. Not necessarily physically explode, but, kind of like if you were to leave your dog alone, your dog's just going to run away. Things like that. So these cattle that people had before were just leaving and essentially roaming these areas. After the war, though, there was so many cattle with few people that could afford to buy them or have a horse or have a ranch to tend for them. Okay, so kind of putting that on pause, we're going to talk about a little bit about the railroad expansion. And the reason we're going to talk about railroad expansion is because this ties back to how they were able to distribute cattle. But like it says there in that little section of railroad expansion, after the Civil War, railroads expanded westward. If you were to look at a U.S. map, remember it starts off with the 13 colonies, right? So in that eastern part of the U.S., and we expand westward. So the creation of the railroad kind of starts there and is moving westward, right? Because after the Civil War, railroads expanded westward. This allowed ranchers to ship their cattle markets across Texas and to the north and to the east. This allowed the ranchers guys who had the cattle, who had big ranches, to say, you know what, we need to ship meats to Chicago, New York, Boston, to the Carolinas, to Washington, to all these states that essentially didn't have the land anymore to be able to hold these cattle ranches, right? So this is where you see the creation of our next section, which is the meat markets. Okay. a market for the beef. After the Civil War, the demand for beef increased, with stockyards and packing houses being established near Chicago and St. Louis. Remember, St. Louis, guys, was essentially the middle of the country at that time. Although they had explored California and all that, St. Louis was known as the gateway to the West. From there on, it was essentially free roaming. So they figured that if they could create a station in St. Louis, Missouri, if you're looking on YouTube right now, go and open up another tab and look at a map. You look at St. Louis. They built a railroad system from Texas to St. Louis, and from St. Louis, guys, they were able to send it, boom, north to Chicago, northeast to New York and Boston area, or from there they could send it back southward to the Carolinas. Okay. With that, we see the creation of stockyards. A stockyard, guys, is a pen where livestock is kept before either being butchered or being shipped to a market. The stockyards, if you look, I wish I could get you a picture right now, a live picture of some of the stockyards in Fort Worth. You're looking at a stockyard, guys, that's, if you can picture B.L. Gray, it was the size of B.L. Gray, with aisles and aisles and aisles of these cattle coming in. One, to be butchered for meat markets. If you have gone to your local HEB with your parents, right now we see all the meats, all the chickens, all the meats, they're already prepared for us. But they start in the stockyard, guys. And then from there, either they're sold to a butcher shop, or they're sold to a market or to a rancher, right? And the next one is called, the one we're going to see there in our notes, is a packing house. It's a warehouse where beef is prepared for shipment. So once it's there, it's taken to the butcher shop, guys. It's cut into the different cuts. You got steaks, you got ground beef, you got hamburger meat, you got sausage links, you got all different types of cuts. It's then sent to a packing house where it's prepared for shipment, and then it's sold to all these different types of these shops, right? So with the creation of these markets for the beef, these stockyards, packing houses, you see our next section, excuse me, and it's the creation of these cow towns. These cow towns, guys, developed, and what it says there in our little section, it says a longhorn that was worth $4 in Texas brought $40 into a packing house. As a result, a man by the name of Joseph G. McCoy built the first cow town in Abilene, Texas, Abilene, Kansas, along the Union Pacific Railroad. So the Union Pacific Railroad, guys, starts off on the East Coast, and then you have the Pacific Railroad system, and they're going to meet in the middle of the country. It's kind of a race for that, right? And we'll talk about that a little later. So these two railroads coming from the different sides of the country kind of meet together. That way the country is connected on this railroad system, okay? And a cow town, guys, is a town that serves as a market for cattle. So what people were doing is, okay, I gotta move my cows. Let's say I live down here in Mission, Texas. I got 1,000 cows, and I gotta move them to Kansas. But there's no railroad system. So how do I do that? How am I going to be able to take my cows from Mission, Texas, to essentially Abilene, Kansas, which is, open up a new tab, look at your map. Where's Kansas? It's just above Oklahoma, and right underneath Nebraska, right? You look at it. How am I going to get my cows there? Well, I gotta work on this trail. I got to work on a path. I got to hire people. I got to hire vaqueros. I got to hire ranchers to help me and my herd get to Kansas safely, so that I could send those cows, sell them, and then go from there, right? So we talk about these cattle trails, okay? So cattle trails. Some of the most important, or some of the most famous ones that you see there, is the Chisholm Trail. It was the first cattle trail that connected Texas to the Abilene cow town, okay? It was 35,000 cattle reached Abilene on this trail in 1867, and 6 million longhorns by 1887, okay? As more railroads were built, more trails were developed, okay? Essentially, what happened over time, guys, is people were seeing, hey, the creation of these railroads, man, I can get from point A to point B quicker. And we were eventually we're going to see how from the top, right, from the Union Pacific, we kind of see a spider web down of how these railroads were created to be able to reach these big cities. They just wouldn't, these ranchers wouldn't just go out by themselves. They needed to hire these people, these ranchers, these vaqueros, right? Excuse me. Since most ranchers were established in West Texas, excuse me, this region developed a cowboy culture. The cowboy or the cowhand or vaquero, right, has become a popular folk hero and a symbol of the West. Um, we talked about it earlier. Remember, the vaquero, the cowboy, is a Spanish descendant, right? Because in Spain, they had horses, they had cattle, they had many years and generations of practice of how to break in a horse, how to essentially work a horse, how to essentially round up cattle. This vaquero way of life was something new to the Americas, but not necessarily new to Spain. So when they brought it over, vaquero, cowboy, they're able to introduce it to this new West Texas life, this folklore that we live up to, the big hat, the strong, they got the guns on the side, things like that. So with the creation of this cowboy culture, we also see the creation of big ranches, right? These big ranches, big industries that they were able to essentially have huge amounts of cattle, longhorns, and livestock and agriculture. So in our next section there, we're talking about barbed wire. So the success of the ranching industry caused ranches to become crowded, or excuse me, ranges to become crowded. So essentially a big piece of land, was essentially, you might have two or three different ranchers clash. Like, hey, this is my cow, this is my cow, this is your cow. We need to be able to get in there and move, right? So with that, too many ranchers competing for pastures or space. So in the year 1873, a man by the name of Joseph L. Glidden invented barbed wire, which was inexpensive and kept cattle from destroying crops on other farms, right? As a result, open ranges became a thing of the past. Because of the creation of barbed wire, guys, we see that essentially that ranches are now squared off. We now see that cows can no longer go through any pastures whatsoever. These trails are now essentially becoming boom. There's no jumping through. Let's, for example, no jumping through the Saenz Ranch and then the Gonzalez Ranch and then the Leal Ranch. No, essentially you had to go through a certain trail. These barbed wire fences were the first creation of, so a cow could not mess up your ranch, your range, your agriculture. Because when cows travel, guys, hey, they don't care. They're just going to go through whatever field, whichever way they feel safe. If there's agriculture, if there's whatever there may be through the middle of it, boom, they don't care. They're just going to go. So with this creation of barbed wire, right, we see commercial ranching come into the picture in our next section. So in commercial ranching, it says, since ranching was so successful, many foreign investors bought ranches in West Texas. The invention of barbed wire allowed these investors to build fences, which caused ranching to become more commercial instead of a way of life. So for many people, right, it was, and I'm a vaquero, I'm proud to be a vaquero. A vaquero was a way of life for them. It was a free range, right? I could travel kind of like a nomadic type of lifestyle. But with foreign investors seeing how much money can be made if I buy 500 acres and I buy 500 cows, 500 longhorns, I can make way more much money if I hire a couple of ranch hands, some cowboys, and work it. So this new way of life essentially becomes into a commercial standpoint instead of a regular vaquero. So with that, we see this creation of windmills. And you think, well, windmills. Why are we talking about windmills in West Texas? Why are we talking about essentially windmills, at all? But since West Texas was so dry with few rivers, cattle owners had allowed their cattle to roam the open ranges in search of water. But if you remember, guys, um, West Texas, very dry, very little rain, very little precipitation in that area. So, however, these windmills were invented to pump water from the underground wells, and ranchers used this to provide water for their cattle and to keep them in certain areas. Okay, so guys, that's ranching in Texas. We see this as a new way of life. Guys, y'all need to just make sure that you guys do this. Like I said earlier, guys, at the beginning of the video, this is a new way. This is a new distance learning. This is what we're going to be doing. This is going to be chapter 17, ranching in Texas. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope to see you guys soon. We'll be hopping on hopefully live again on Thursday, same time around 1 p.m. I'll be sending out a question with this, okay? That way you guys can answer it on Google Classroom. Guys, if you haven't already, please tell the rest of your classmates about this. Tell the rest of your classmates to essentially subscribe to the channel. I'll be going on live on Thursday, again at 1 p.m. on Thursday, okay, to talk about chapter 18. And then, yeah, we'll be going live on Thursday to talk about chapter 18. Look out for the question. Guys, also, let your parents know about this, okay? Let your parents know that I'll be hopping on here on YouTube to talk. That way they know, then they're informed as to what's going on, what's happening, what we're doing with history, okay? Other than that, guys, hey, please stay safe out there. I can see you guys in the chat. Guys, if you can't, I'm gonna make a. If you can't print out the worksheet, guys, essentially just download it. Or you don't even have to download it. I mean, yeah, download it. Just type it in, fill it in, and just save it onto your drive, guys. With your Shareland ISD, you can save it on your drive. What else? Hey, please, guys, stay safe out there. Please practice that social distancing. Let's flatten the curve with this whole, coronavirus thing. Guys, other than that, please stay safe. Please be careful, and we'll see you guys on Thursday. Remember, tell your parents, tell your classmates, tell everybody to get on here. That way we can, talk about Texas history. With that being said, guys, stay safe, stay active. Those of you who are athletes, make sure you get a little workout in. This is Coach Signs signing out. Stay blessed.